Hi, yes, as you just heard, I'm Andrew Steele. I wrote a book called Ageless, The New Science of Getting Older Without Getting Old. And this excellent panel here is going to be talking about just that, how we can use the science of aging to potentially keep us healthier for longer, maybe even much longer. And you might be wondering, we've got a very diverse audience here from around the world. This forum is about democracy. We've heard from people living under oppressive regimes. We've talked about conflict. So what is a panel on the science of aging doing on the agenda? Well, I think we need to think about what aging actually is. And I would characterize aging as our biggest global problem, even against the background of all these other important issues. The reason being that the aging process makes diseases much more likely. Diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, the increasing risk of infection as we get older. Age, how old you are, is the single biggest risk factor for contracting one of these diseases or dying of them. And what that means is, if you do the maths, aging is the single largest cause of death globally. About 70% of deaths worldwide are caused by these increasing risk of diseases. And that means over 100,000 people every single day die because of aging. And that means, although sometimes this is a pandemic so huge that it's obscured by its own enormity, it is, I think, our biggest humanitarian challenge, slightly bizarre as that may sound. But the good news is we can do something about it. As the people on this excellent panel are going to tell you, we have ideas in the lab. We've got dozens of ways, in fact, that we can slow down, even reverse the process in mice. And all we need is to accelerate some of that development into human beings in order to turn these treatments into something that could keep everyone globally around the world living healthier for longer, defer some of these terrible diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's, perhaps even many of these diseases at the same time. And some of these are already beginning human trials, as you'll hear. So we've got here David Sinclair, professor at Harvard. We've also got a couple of people from Matter Bio, which is a company doing some very exciting things in aging as well. We've got Chris and Sam. And we're going to start with a keynote from David to set the stage of some of the really exciting work that's going on in his lab. So take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you all for coming today. So I have about 10 minutes to update you on 30 years of research. But I will start with an overall view as to why work on aging in the first place. What used to be thought about 30 years ago and still is somewhat prevalent in society today is that aging is considered a natural process and therefore acceptable, which is separate from disease. And for over 200 years, we've been focused on what we see are the symptoms of aging. We call these diseases. We've given them names: diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, frailty even, and even a decline in the immune system, which leads to infections and death all too often. And what we've realized now, just in the last 30 years, is that these are all manifestations of a unified underlying process that is common even between yeast cells, worms and flies and mice, of course, and humans. And even the same process occurs in the brain, in the liver, in the heart, the kidney. And so what Andrew has said here is so true that if we were to focus on really the root cause of these symptoms of aging, which we've called diseases, we would have really a much bigger impact. Now, I'm not here to say we shouldn't work on diseases. Of course, I work at Harvard Medical School. But what I am saying is the fact, and I want you to think about this, if we were to cure cancer, all cancers today, and not that that's something that we shouldn't do. My mother died of cancer, for one. How many years of extra life would we get on average? Think of a number. The actual number is about 2.5 years. It's not a lot, but of course it's worth doing. But really the large gains that are left to be had for humanity will only come by tackling this underlying universal process we've called aging, and neglected for far too long. And unless we tackle this, we will only make small gains on healthy lifespan. So the reason I emphasize the word healthy is that there's also another misconception in society, and that is that we are trying as researchers to extend lifespan, and then this conjures up the image of a lot of old people being around in nursing homes. And this is the opposite of what we're talking about today. What we aim to do and what we're doing in animal studies now is keeping organisms healthier and younger for longer, and even reversing the aging process. So what does that mean? Well, it means that one day we will be able to reset the body, reset tissues, reset the brain, reset the kidneys, perhaps reset the entire human body so that it can repair itself. There's a reason why 12-year-olds typically don't get Alzheimer's disease or motor neuron disease or diabetes, though it is possible. It's because a young body can heal itself. It can prevent diseases. It can even kill cancer, right? Young people are getting cancer cells all the time, but they're killing them every day. And so by rejuvenating the body, we have a chance of not just slowing these diseases that we do with modern medicine, as we call it, but truly curing diseases that are currently incurable, like Alzheimer's and like motor neuron disease. And in fact, in my lab, we find it remarkably easy, in animals at least, of course. We haven't yet tested this in people, though we hope to in the coming year and years. We're curing things that were once thought to be impossible to cure. Blindness is curable. Not just old age blindness, but a crushed optic nerve will regrow back to the brain. Last week we cured motor neuron disease. We just published about 2 weeks ago that we could cure multiple sclerosis. And so this is remarkable only if you forget that there is an underlying healing mechanism that we all have in our bodies that we've never really utilized before. So we know this process exists. We know that we can cure some diseases alone without medicine occasionally, but we now have the ability to turn on these mechanisms that are only in very young individuals. A newborn can heal an optic nerve, but as adults we don't. But I believe we've now discovered a way to turn on those repair mechanisms so that our body can heal. If you've seen the movie Deadpool, you'll understand the kind of repair mechanisms we're talking about. These are the same repair mechanisms that we believe animals use to repair their bodies. If you cut the limb off a salamander, it'll grow back. If you cut the tail off a fish, it'll grow back. We've lost that ability, except for the liver, which we can regrow the majority of, but the rest of our body does not heal. We evolved out in the savannas where we were unlikely to make it past the age of 40 to 50, and that's why our bodies do not heal very well. We didn't need to live beyond that age, and that's why we decay after those ages. There was no selection. But there are animals, and certainly there are plants that live many hundreds of years. And these are mammals. These aren't just distant species. These are species that have warm blood and feed their children with milk. These are whales, of course. And we can certainly understand why they live longer. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But we can harness what whales use and elephants use to live a long time. It's very rare for these animals to get cancer, for example, because they have mechanisms that prevent cancer that we don't have. And it's actually a very simple thing to do. We could turn on a gene called P53. We only have 2 copies in every cell, and an elephant has, I believe, 5. So there are small changes that we can make, single genes that can radically improve human health in a way that doesn't just treat one disease, can treat potentially all age-related diseases, even ones that we don't currently think of as age-related, like motor neuron diseases. Why? Because we're not just working on aging, we're not just working on longevity, we're working fundamentally on what keeps us healthy, what allows our tissues to repair, or at least once allowed our tissues to repair when we were relatives of salamanders, but we've lost that ability. So I do believe that we stand on the precipice of a revolution in medicine with guys like these who are finding new ways to treat diseases that afflict many of our family members. And also, I represent hundreds of scientists around the world working on this topic. And for 30 years, we were pretty much unknown entities, a lot like the AI field, which was laughed at originally, but now everyone's taking quite seriously as a revolution. Longevity science is coming, and the world is waking up to it finally. And we need to get ready for the consequences on society. What will happen when you can expect to live over 100 playing tennis with your great-grandkids? This world is coming. There's no question about it. It's really just a question of when is this going to happen. Will it be our generations or will it be our children's generation? But it is coming very soon. And what was once considered magic and wishful thinking is becoming real in the same way the Wright brothers were once laughed at. And so finally, just in the last few minutes, I want to talk about how is this possible? Well, we scientists, we've been working on this for a while. We started in simple organisms like worms and yeast. And of course, in those days, it was hard to make the case that we were going to see any medicines in our lifetime. But the progress in this field has happened far faster than I imagined when I began. And now it's going so fast, my head is spinning. I barely can keep up with the scientific literature. And AI will only speed that further. We truly are going exponential in this field. And what once took 10 years to make a drug, now we can come up with an effective drug literally within days. Of course, you still have to test it, and that's a challenge that I think we should talk about. How do you test a potential longevity drug? There are ways, but it's not easy. So just briefly, the mechanism, which is based on a theory that came out of the work I did originally in yeast at MIT, in the lab of my dear mentor, Lenny Guarenti. I was in my 20s, he was in his mid-40s, and we were studying yeast, and our team discovered that there was a gene that controlled aging in yeast cells and made them live longer. And its name is SIR2, SIR2. Gave rise to a whole group of genes that we now study. There are 7 in our bodies. We call them SIR2ins. And it's gone from 2 papers a year to about 1,000. So it's really exploded. And what SIR2ins do, similar to other longevity genes, is they protect the body in times of adversity. So when we exercise, when we eat well, if we don't eat often and we eat less, SIR2ins are active. And what I believe their main job is to protect information in the body, genomic information and epigenomic information. And if you haven't heard of epigenomic, I'm sure you've heard of genomic, that's the DNA code. Epigenomic, these are structures that control which genes are switched on and off in which cell. And the epigenome determines how a cell functions and whether it's a liver or a brain cell. And our evidence indicates that it's epigenomic information that's lost over time, partly due to DNA damage, partly due to stress, partly due to inactivity and sitting down all day and eating too often. We get a loss of epigenetic information, and what that leads to is cells not reading the right genes anymore and losing their identity and malfunctioning, leading to diseases, again, getting back to diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's. These are manifestations, I believe, of a loss of information. And then finally, as Andrew mentioned, I want to say we believe that this information has a backup copy. That's the real breakthrough, that we can restore that youthful information in the body and reset the age of cells. And this is how we're able to cure blindness in animals. And we could talk about how we do that in a minute, after I have to wrap up. But I do want to say finally that we're seeing just the beginnings of what's possible when you can reset the body to be young again. It's just the beginning, and we only published this in 2020, but already we're seeing many labs working on this and publishing almost every week of a new disease, ailment, or injury that can be treated this way. And I couldn't be more excited about the future. I'm so glad that we're talking about it. And thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much. So actually, I would like to follow up on the comment you just made about curing blindness. Firstly, how does that technology work? And secondly, what is the connection between treating blindness, which is a very specific disease of a very specific part of the body? How is that going to transform at some point into maybe a medicine that we might all be taking?
Yeah, so as all scientists do, we stand on the shoulders of giants and we should acknowledge them. One of the big ones is Shinya Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering how to turn our adult cells into pluripotent stem cells that can be turned into any other cell type. This was a shocking discovery, very worthy of a Nobel. But turning our bodies into stem cells is not going to make us younger. It's going to cause cancer. And if you turn on the 4 standard canonical Yamanaka genes, what we call Yamanaka factors, you kill a mouse in 2 days. So this was never going to be a good therapy. It's good for making stem cells, not so good for reversing the age of the body. And so we worked for many years. And when I say we, I need to credit one student in particular, Wancheng Lu, who's now at MIT. His goal was to see if we could use embryonic genes to reverse aging. We hit upon using a combination of 3 of those Yamanaka genes, leaving out 1. And that was the breakthrough, that we could now reverse aging in human cells, and then mice, and now monkeys. We could reverse the age of the body without causing tumors. And we send the cells back about 75 to 80% in age. They go back to being quite young and healthy again. And we do this by introducing those 3 genes. We introduce these genes by using a domesticated virus called an AAV. But the future, as Andrew had asked, what does the future look like? Well, first of all, this gene therapy is curing blindness in monkeys, and will go into the first human primate, a human, in less than a year. We're just making the material to start that trial, and we know where we're going to do the trial. It's going to be for 2 diseases, one called NION, which is non-arteritic ischemic optic neuropathy, which is basically a stroke in the back of your eye. And it's becoming more common, 2 to 3-fold, thanks to these new weight loss drugs. We don't know why they cause this disease or this condition, but people are waking up blind in one eye, and all doctors can do is say, I'm sorry about that, your other eye will probably go in the next year or so. So we're hoping to cure that and restore vision. And we're also treating glaucoma, which we've had great success in mice treating. But what's the future like? If this works, and cross your fingers that it does, and hopefully the monkey eye is not too different than ours. And if it does work, what the plan is, and I can't divulge too much because it's now in commercial hands, but there's a real opportunity to deliver these genes in also small molecules, so chemicals that could be taken as an injection or a pill, to treat other diseases. On the list include liver diseases, kidney diseases, even motor neuron disease. And there are a lot of technologies, including the ones that my colleagues here are inventing, to deliver genes and RNA to change how cells function. So it's not really a question of if we're going to be able to do this. It's just a matter of proving out the technology. And the vision restoration, that's using off-the-shelf technology. There's nothing amazing about that. And so it's just a matter of will it work or not? And I'm optimistic and hopeful that it will work. And if it doesn't, we'll figure out a way that it does. And last thing I'll say is, it may sound crazy to take a pill and reverse aging, even slow aging. But in my lab, we talk about this, and we do this all the time. I've got students who, over the holiday break, the Christmas break, we tried a cocktail of chemicals that work on human cells, and we literally within 4 weeks reversed the age of a mouse and restored its ability to walk, to hear, to even kill tumor cells, and its skin, even the skin on the mice even looked younger. And that's a whole different story. But yet, in my lab, reversing aging is not something we talk about in the future. We talk about something that we're currently doing. And so hopefully I've given you an idea how this all works.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And I think I'm just going to use this opportunity to sort of broaden out the context a bit, because I'm very, very excited by this idea of epigenetic reprogramming. I think it's one of the single most promising things in the field of aging biology. But actually, one of the other huge developments in the last sort of 10, 20 years is that we've converged on an understanding of what aging is. And I think the easiest way to explain this is there was a paper that came out in 2013 called The Hallmarks of Aging. And there was another update to that paper that came out a couple of years ago. And the idea is that a hallmark of aging is a fundamental cellular, molecular, biological change happening in our bodies. It's not a disease process, but it might be cells in the body getting old. One of the hallmarks is called the accumulation of senescent cells, aged cells. And one of the hallmarks is this epigenetic change that David has just been talking about reversing. And there are, depending on your list, in my book I got 10. As I said, the scientists now have 12. Others will argue there's 7. We're all basically talking about the same thing, this collection of different things that happen in our body. And as these things happen over time, they increase that risk of disease. They increase our susceptibility to infection. But it's not just disease, it's the frailty, it's the impotence, the incontinence, the cognitive decline. You might not call it dementia, but you're starting to forget your keys a bit more. These kinds of things that we all experience as we get older. These are all driven by those biological processes. And so although I very much hope that David has solved it, and if we solve the epigenetics, we'll solve the rest of these hallmarks, I think it's very important that we work on as many of them as possible, because it's likely that we're going to need a combination of treatments. It's not going to be a single pill that cures the whole aging process. We're going to have a collection of different preventative medicines. And so I'm really excited that Chris and Sam are here, because one of the other hallmarks is the accumulation of mutations, which are errors in our DNA. And I think actually this is one of the most neglected hallmarks. The epigenetic reprogramming stuff David's working on, it's hot, and rightly so. And that means there's David's company, Life Biosciences. There's a company called RetroBio, which is backed by, among others, Sam Altman of OpenAI fame. There's also a company called Altos Labs, which is backed by, among other people, Jeff Bezos. So there are clearly some big names, and there's thankfully some decent amount of money flowing into the field. But unfortunately, DNA damage, mutations, which we're about to talk about, is, I think, one of the more neglected aspects of aging. And so, Chris Bradley, can you tell us, why is it that damage to our DNA and mutations are so important for the aging process?
Yeah, so thank you for having us. So we were a company called Matter Bio. So we're really in the middle of commercializing and testing and getting these amazing discoveries into the clinic and into people to see if they work and to get them disseminated and into medicines. And so our angle, we're very big believers in David's information theory of aging. There's a lot of evidence that is surrounding that's pointing in that direction. And our angle is, if you think of epigenetics as the software, as what's being changed and expressing, the hardware is the genome. And so what we're focusing on is how do you protect the genome? And how do you keep it from getting noise, from losing its integrity, its stability? And one thing to point out, again, it sounds like science fiction, but one of the first things we did is we looked at what animals live the longest, especially what vertebrates and what mammals live the longest. And we have some incredible examples of a few that are now famous. The Greenland shark lives, they think, up to potentially 500 years. So there's sharks swimming around that have been around since before the United States was a country, since way before. They were already old by the time, the American Revolution was happening. They are still around. And same with bowhead whales. So they're mammals. They can live up to 200 years. And so this has been an area of study for a while, but now with some of the newest tools in sequencing and studying DNA and studying what's generating that, a pattern that is emerging is that they are able to protect their DNA, that they have superior repair. And what's interesting is these animals also don't get cancer. So as back to what David said, no one wants to be frail and old and sick for a very long time. These animals are healthy for much, much longer. Now, what's very interesting is if you look further, it seems to be the case with supercentenarians as well. So, where this classic, you'll ask someone who's lucky enough to live to 110, what's their secret? And you'll hear all sorts of really zany things, pack of cigarettes a day, a couple of shots of some kind of whiskey. And it's like, how is that possible? I don't recommend that, right? Unless you're very lucky, that's not a good idea. And part of the reason we think that they're able to do this is they have genetically enhanced repair, among other things. Mm-hmm. So that's a long way of saying what we're focusing on is treating cancer when it's there, using synthetic and attenuated bacteria. So bacteria that finds and kills cancer, and I can explain what that means. And then we're also looking at these long-lived animals and long-lived people, and we're going to announce this soon. We have a massive consortium of scientists we're working with, sequencing centenarians and sequencing potentially thousands of animal samples across these different species. And we're taking those genes and then putting it into cells, putting it into animals, and enhancing DNA repair. And so we think this is very complementary. We want to slow down the process of aging, and then that way we can hopefully reverse it as well.
It's such cool technology. And just to unpack a bit of jargon in case you hadn't heard of it before, a centenarian is someone who lives to 100, and a supercentenarian is someone who lives to 110. So these are incredibly rare people. It's quite hard to imagine quite how rare they are, because above the age of about 105, your chance of living one more year is 50% roughly. It's like a toss of a coin. That means if you make it to 105, your chances of making it to 110 are half, a quarter, an eighth, the 16th, 1/32, which is really quite low. And so imagine making it to that age, even getting to 105 is pretty remarkable. Making it all the way to 110 is just crazy. So that Chris is the CEO of Matter Bio. And so I thought I'd hand over to Sam, who is Chief Science Officer, I believe, to tell us a bit about how does this technology work? How does this sci-fi sounding, how can you use bacteria to fight cancer?
Yeah, so we have manipulated the bacteria, and I won't get too much into the scientific detail, so that it goes specifically to the cancer. And what it does there, it will start expressing tetanus antigens, and people are normally vaccinated against tetanus. So then your body starts recognizing that the cancer, which normally is kind of blinded by the immune suppressed environment. So it starts to see, okay, this is actually a disease I know, this is tetanus, I have to kill this, and starts to slowly remove it. And we have now shown that we can cure glioblastoma, which is brain tumors, pancreatic tumors, ovarian cancer, and intestinal cancer. So, and we're now in the production of human-grade material so that we can start injecting this year in patients.
That's super cool. And how are you hoping, I gather this is your first technology, and hopefully once you've cured cancer, you're going to move on to repairing DNA and stopping it happening in the first place. So how's that going to work, do you hope?
Yeah, so it's kind of, that's what we want to do. So it's prevention, and if it's too late, so we want to prevent that you accumulate this damage. So DNA in itself is actually a very unstable molecule, and what's happening is your cell needs to access the DNA to know what it has to do, and so it's all of them accessing, and it's kind of your blueprint, but it's damaging a lot. So, and if your cells wouldn't be able to repair it, your DNA will degrade in a couple of days. So we're actually actively repairing millions of times in each cell the DNA. Now the problem is we're not able to keep up with the amount of damage. So over time we see more and more damage. So if you take a cell of an old person, you can actually look at in the cellular level, you see the damage that it has accumulated over its lifetime. So we want to prevent that. So we want to give it these long-lived animal genes. So we give you a bit of shark gene to kind of be able to enhance your DNA repair and actually cope with this damage over lifetime. But if it's too far gone, so if your cells are actually already corrupted and you get cancer, it doesn't help them to prevent it anymore. We have to get rid of the cells.
It's really cool, exciting technology. So that's given you, I think, a bit of an overview of two of the hallmarks of aging, from I think one of the most, the hottest to one of the ones that I think needs a bit more attention. So really good luck to both of you. I thought I'd just quickly ask you to all go through the panel and say, can you give me an example of a technology that you're not working on, that you're excited about, just to give an impression of how broad this field is, like a drug or some kind of therapy that can slow down aging that's not in your lab or not in your company. David?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I want to say before I talk about that is it may sound like we're working on different things, the two of us. One's they're working on stopping DNA damage, and I'm working on stopping the decay of the cell's ability to read the DNA. But actually, we published a paper in 2023 that shows that one leads to the other. Specifically, that DNA damage, when you either accelerate that or slow it down, you affect the aging process at the epigenetic level. To put it another way, DNA damage is one of the things that accelerates the loss of information in the body, the epigenetic information, that loss of the software. So if you start smashing the computer, you're actually corrupting the software as well. So they're stopping the smashing, and I'm resetting the software, reinstalling software. And we're also, in my lab, we're excited about doing that. We've found genes from bacteria that slow down DNA damage. And we're actually finding that if we put these into worms, they live longer, their epigenome, their information is more stable, not just their DNA, but the other information. And we're doing this in human cells as well. It works. So I think it's an excellent approach and very complementary to what we're doing. So you guys can delay the process, and then if it gets too far, then we'll come in and we'll reverse it. We'll have to sign a contract on that. I'm excited about a lot of technologies. I'm excited about what AI is doing for drug development. But that's not specific to aging, of course, and longevity. In the longevity field, which I think is the topic here, I'm excited about addressing the different hallmarks. There's one hallmark called cellular senescence. You may have heard of it. Sometimes we call these zombie cells. These are when our cells get too old and their epigenome and their genome gets too messed up. cells check out and they stop dividing, and they sit there and they become highly inflammatory, and they can even cause cancer. And by the time you're my age, 55, you're filled with them. And what has been shown by a number of labs, James Kirkland at the Mayo Clinic has done a lot of work. If you delete these cells, you can also revive the health of the body. Cells grow better, less inflammation, less diabetes in animals. And there are some clinical trials that are looking promising. Again, the eye looks like a good place, or joints they're also tackling. So I think that that's a good approach, is to try and address the very end product of this information loss, which is the formation of these senescent cells.
Chris?
Yeah, so what I'm really excited about, and I think what has gotten us to some degree to this point and to really understanding these underlying drivers, is the ability for us to sequence and read DNA and understand the epigenome. And that technology has really gone exponential. It cost $1 billion to sequence a single human's genome in the year 2000, the original genome. And now we do it all the time in the lab, and it's a couple $100. It's really cheap, and that's probably inflated. We're not going to go there, but you could probably do it cheaper. But even then, it's great. And so what we're starting to now be able to do is start to look at individual cells. And it's at that point that you start to see that every cell in your body is actually different and gets more different. The information is not just lost, it's diversified. It becomes a mosaic, right? And so now, because you start to even be able to measure that, you can start to ask questions like, what does that mean for aging, for disease? And we're starting to see that a big part of disease is this loss of information integrity. And the only reason we know that is because these technologies now exist to measure it. So that's also why we're starting to have more confidence that these are main drivers, is for the first time in human history, we can start looking at every cell and its neighbors and say what's different and why. So I'm really excited about that.
I think just to illustrate, there are always connections between these things. You're talking about how we can collect this data vastly more cheaply than ever in human history. And David mentioned AI. Like, that's what we're going to crunch this vast volume of data with. So it's really, intimately connected to all these different advances. And Sam?
Yeah, so both David and our company is working on like genome and epigenome, which is both in the nucleus. But there is another organelle that has DNA and information in it, and that's the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And I think this is also important because with time that also is, you lose information in the mitochondria, and it's very important also for a lot of metabolic diseases and age-related metabolic diseases, and also neurodegenerative diseases. You see that it plays a big role. And so there are a lot of companies that try to develop therapeutics, and what we can see is also that cells can exchange these mitochondria between each other. And there are now companies working on trying to deliver mitochondria to the cell, so basically refreshing that and bringing back the old, like removing the old ones and kind of getting new ones in, so that you can produce energy like a young person again on a cellular level.
Thank you very much. So I think we've given you a bit of a flavour of the optimism here. We have loads of ideas of how we can understand the aging process more deeply and use that understanding in order to treat it. So I thought I'd try and bring things into the sort of practical, real world. How are we actually going to do this? And so I thought I'd start with Chris. You're CEO of a company trying to commercialize this stuff. It's a bit of a slog, can be at times. Can you give the audience an idea of some of the challenges of trying to commercialize an anti-aging drug or an anti-aging therapy?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we're, as a company, you're dealing with all the challenges of a startup. Capital, time, scale, the challenges of a biotech. So regulatory requirements, safety, of course, production quality. And then on top of that, the complexity of what does it mean to reverse or slow down aging, and how do you incorporate that into our current system, which really was not designed for prevention of any disease. It's really not easy to show prevention or to get something approved for prevention, let alone prevention of a cause of disease. And so we're facing all those challenges. We picked the hardest possible path for startups because we're passionate, and because I think we see that we're very close to reality now. And so, yeah, we're dealing with all of these things. I would say one of the challenges, which I think David intimated to, and curious to talk about more, is if a trial is measuring an age difference, prevention or slowing of aging, how do you not make that trial last 200 years? That's the ultimate trial. And of course, if we're still around, then it works, and if we're not, it doesn't. Not a great startup strategy. If you want to fund a 200-year trial, please talk to me. So the reality is, we need shortcuts. We need to find out what can you measure that you are confident will change with age, that you can affect in a normal trial time period. So that's what we're looking for all the time, and then. On our end, we're also accelerating damage. So that's one of the positives. Damage, we know, leads to disease, primarily cancer, and we have this strong hypothesis that it's a driver of aging. But you can determine after you damaged a cell or damaged an organism how it's doing. You don't have to wait for it to get old. You can actually sequence it. You can look at its phenotype. You can see how it's behaving, how it looks. Does it look frail? Does it get cancer? And those are what we're primarily starting with, because it's an easy pitch. Prevent cancer, treat these age-related diseases. These are obviously bad things we should treat, and that's how we're sort of circumventing this more complex route.
And David, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned metformin earlier. There's actually been for some time now plans to do a big trial on metformin to try and do a trial for what could be the first anti-aging drug if that trial was done right. So can you tell us a bit about the TAME trial and how that seeks to make aging a direct target for regulators?
Yeah, so the TAME trial, which is targeting aging with metformin, in the US, it's been largely disappointing because there hasn't been enough funding for such a trial, which could cost in excess of $20 million or so dollars. And the reason primarily there isn't enough money is that the NIH decided it wasn't, they didn't want to spend the whole amount. They gave, I believe, around half. But private industry or individuals didn't want to spend, so far, haven't wanted to support the rest of the study. Why? Primarily because metformin is a generic drug and there's not a way to recoup the money. So for now, it looks like one of these technologies that we've talked about today will be the front runner in hopefully showing that you can slow aging or reverse it. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about how would you do that, because I've been trying to do this my whole life. There are two ways, really. One is to do an aging trial. That's the hard way, right? TAME is an example of why it's so hard. The other way is to focus on diseases that you can treat with the technology that get you on the market fast, get your funding, your investors, their money back, which is why they will fund you in the first place. We do live in a capitalist society, and NIH and other funding agencies just don't have the amount of money to devote to drug development. It's not what they do. And given that the average drug is at least $500 million, some would say $1 billion US dollars to make, it's well beyond what you can get from a grant. So you do need people to believe that you're going to make a return. So how do you do that? Well, you look for the fastest way to do that, and usually that's pick a disease where there's no currently a treatment. So for example, blindness. One of the reasons we've gone after blindness, besides the fact that it's much easier to do gene therapy in the eye than the rest of the body, is also because blindness is currently incurable, period. And so if we're even partially successful, then we're much more likely to get approved and get the molecule on the market or the treatment. And then what I believe and hope is that more trials will be done with the medicine in other areas, and it'll be used broadly, and then eventually for aging itself. But we have to start with the disease, and that's the second approach that I think is the right way to do that. But interestingly, we have been doing with an earlier company that I started over 10 years ago called Biotech, which works on age slowing, basically using NAD boosters, as they're called. Molecules like NMN and NR have become world famous. They're a multi-billion-dollar industry now on the supplement side. I'm trying to make a proven medicine that actually we know works and is pure when you take it. Those trials are looking very promising. We're doing 5 different trials right now in Alzheimer's and in kidney disease. And also, as I really want to make a point, in a rare disease called Friedreich's ataxia. And that could be approved much faster than something like heart disease or kidney disease. And so that's why why we've chosen a rare disease to go after. The government, the US government, looks more favorably on treating rare diseases than diseases where there's a lot of people and there's already medicines on the market. I think that's the safest way to get investors a return. And the reason that I'm hopeful that we'll get investors a return, so I've taken 4 companies public. My investors get their money back for sure, but I haven't made a medicine yet. And so I think it's still premature to say there's any sort of victory here besides, fundamental knowledge. But I'm hoping that one of us, whether it's me or someone else, I don't know, but one of us can show that you can make a drug that makes a lot of money for people. And then I think we'll have a lot more attention and an investment in this area, which really, even though it sounds like there's a lot of money because a couple of companies have raised billions of dollars, most small startups, including my own, really we have to work really hard to raise money because in general, biotech is tough, but raising money for longevity is, you have to start at a more basic level to even explain to investors what you're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, David mentioned there the importance of NIH funding, so government funding essentially, to try and support some of the work that's being done where it simply wouldn't be profitable to fund a trial like TAME because, the drug can be produced for pennies per pill. And any company in the world can produce that drug. So even if we showed that it slowed down the aging process, no one would stand to make a profit from it. So I just wanted to ask you, Sam, as a scientist working in industry, what could governments, bodies like the NIH, public funding of science do? What kind of data could they produce? What kind of experiments would you like to see them perform to help, commercial companies, get these things to investors more quickly?
Yeah, so it's, as David mentioned, it's as a longevity company, you want to try to find a clinical path which is easy for you so that you don't get distracted and become a normal biotech. Because I've seen a lot of biotech companies, of longevity biotech companies, suddenly having to pick a clinical path, and then the side mission will be the main mission, and then that's it. So from the government, it will be, of course, very nice to have, because it's so costly, and also for designing clinical trials and making the drug before even doing the IND application. It's very hard to know what to do, and it will be good to kind of be able to iterate with them, because once you start a clinical trial and you didn't have the perfect design and it didn't work because of that and not because your drug didn't work, it's done. Mm-hmm. So then your drug, you're not allowed to do it anymore, or you have to start over again, which will cost too much, but no investor will pay that anymore. So it will be nice to be able to iterate with the FDA or kind of get some support there for clinical design and manufacturing as well. Yeah.
And I think this really is an area where governments and regulatory bodies and funders of science can make a big difference. David co-wrote a paper with an economist called Andrew Scott that calculated that slowing down aging by a single year, so keeping people healthier for an additional year, less healthcare costs and so on, would be worth $38 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion to the US economy. So there's a huge market to be unlocked here. The challenge is that we really need some of that sort of public funding to take some of those early risks. And to give you a bit of context, David also mentioned how little funding the field gets. In the US, there is a National Institute for Aging. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a running joke in aging biology that NIA actually stands for National Institute on Alzheimer's Disease, because most of that funding goes into dementia research. The bit that actually does the kind of aging biology that we're all talking about here, the aging biology division of that organization, gets about $300 or $400 million a year, which can sound like quite a lot of money to you and me. It's certainly more than I've got in my bank account, but that's about $1 per American. And that's incredible, because we're spending $1 per person per year on public funding of research into aging. And aging is responsible for about 85% of deaths in America. It's about 90% in most countries in Europe. America's a bit behind us over here. So I think these figures are just absolutely remarkable. And I really think that is the single thing we can do to most drive the field forward. So I think that was a really great discussion. We've got time, I think, for a few audience questions. So do we have any? We had one at the back there. No, that's you. Yes.
Okay, cool. I have lots of questions, but one of the ones that comes up for me is that aren't vested interests a real issue here? In the sense that the pharmaceutical industry at the moment, not to mention the food industry, so many industries that actually make a profit from keeping us unhealthy or kind of treating something that's continually chronic. Is that something that effectively you're coming up against here? I mean, we already know that preventative, kind of just ways of keeping people healthy by getting them to eat better, by all of these things are already a struggle precisely for this reason. Is that something that you're coming up against directly?
Do you want to take that, Chris?
Yeah, so I think normally I would say yes, but actually what gives me a lot of hope recently, and we've had some of these conversations with some major pharmaceutical companies, they have gotten a taste with the latest weight loss medications of what it could look like to prevent and address a large number of potential diseases and make it into a product. And to a product that, if I were to pitch it for us, 5 years ago, it's like it's an injection, right, that you take and you do yourself. Most people wouldn't. I would not have assumed it would have gotten the adoption it has. So I think GLP-1 and these other weight loss medications actually are an incredible example that is changing the mindset. Well, besides, there's hopefully, this is all, the side effect issue is unfortunately for any medicine is something you have to address, right? But I think more from a business argument, prevention is making a ton of money right now for these same players. And so I think it at least shows an example that this could work with our own system in our current setup, and it could do so very successfully.
Yeah.
You're dealing at the threshold of the place where matter becomes life. You're talking about the place where this miracle takes place in the realm of information, which is somewhat abstract because we think of cells as matter. It's a physical thing, right? And as I'm listening carefully, and you're talking about the information that guides what we call chemicals into becoming living things. Mm-hmm. This is deeper than just longevity. This is like, where do we come from? What are we made out of, for goodness sake? So I would just like to know what you've discovered from your on two issues. In your investigation, where does this? Have you found anything where you could say this is where the change takes place, where the information takes place, where the regenerative process starts to take place? Mm-hmm. And the second is consciousness. Is there any? We don't know what consciousness is, but there's some interaction between. I know some people think that it's photons. I have a friend who was doing studies on qi. What is qi? We can't measure it, and we know it works with acupuncture. Yeah. And he was studying whether it was conveyed through photons. It's described as light. Mm. Could you talk a little bit about those deep mysteries that you're dealing with? Yeah. Life and awareness and consciousness.
So, David, can you solve consciousness in about 2 minutes? Because we've got another question over there.
But you're dealing
it's great. I'm joking, don't worry.
No, you're dealing in a realm in which the fundamental issues of what is life, what is meaning, where do we come from, how are we related to the rest of, is matter real or is information real? There's real deep things here that I just can't resist asking you about.
Thank you. Can you tell me who you are and where you come from?
I came from nothing and I'm trying to get back there.
You will get back there. We all will.
We do not try, no problem.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that question. It's so easy to say, good question. But genuinely, that is you've struck the heart of the whole matter. And it's the first time I've been asked that question. Usually it's, where do I buy NMN? Thank you. I normally don't talk about this because I'm working on it under the radar, but I'm happy to tell you the kind of things that I'm thinking about, and they do extend to consciousness. One of the main problems with biology and medicine right now is that we're stuck in late 19th century physics. All right, we biologists tend to think about chemistry in terms of atoms and molecules in a Newtonian kind of way, things bumping around into each other. But there's a whole world that we're ignoring. Particles are popping in and out. There's a whole quantum world that my partner Serena, we talk about this a lot, and she first introduced me to this idea actually. And so I'm formulating ideas. So first of all, you asked me, where is this information? Where does it get lost? And we can read that now. Actually, as we kind of mentioned, it's not that difficult now. A student overnight can read not just the genome, but large parts of the epigenome on a device that used to fill buildings, now is the size of a candy bar, hooked up to a laptop for a few $100s, but probably really only cost 20. That ability, first of all, we can now take people's either blood or a cheek swab, and by reading the DNA and the chemicals that get attached to the DNA, which control the epigenome, they're part of the whole information storage and retrieval system, we can tell someone, estimate how old they are, not chronologically, not how many times they've gone around the sun, which is, for most intents and purposes, irrelevant. We can tell them their biological age. And this is a new thing. Just in the last 5 years, we've got these biological clocks, and we can read whales, we can read trees, and we can read worms. We can see how old they are truly. And this may be a way, by the way, to not just tackle diseases, but at the same time measure if we're impacting aging as well, as a double whammy. Treat the disease, cure the disease, but also figure out if aging is impacted. And so those biological epigenetic clocks have been revolutionary. And it's one of the reasons that I'm inclined to say that the epigenome is super important for aging, because it's right now the best way to estimate not just how old you are, but it can even be used to tell what diseases you have and when you'll get them and even when you'll die. And I want to give huge credit to my colleague Stephen Horvath for being the guy that determined that clock. So these chemicals are called methyls, they're on the DNA. And when the cell methylates a gene, typically it shuts it down. So that's how an embryo develops. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but primarily these chemicals will turn off a liver gene and turn on nerve cell genes to make the brain. Okay, so that's what it does. But over time, what we see with aging, in part because of DNA damage that scrambles it, but also just over time, these chemicals get taken off and put on in the wrong place. And what we're trying to figure out in my lab is, I think we figured out partly what causes them to change over time. So that's partly aging. But how is it possible that the cell knows to return these chemicals back to where they came from? And we believe there's a new type of storage of the software that biologists haven't figured out yet. I'm not prepared to tell that publicly, but I have my best people working on it. But it's probably a new type of storage of genetic information in the cell that we haven't really talked about yet. But we do think there's something special that marks each gene, because the cell somehow knows, let's say out of the 20,000 genes, that gene X needs to be reset in what direction, up or down, and by how much. That information, we don't know exactly how that happens yet.
Or why?
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. This is an incredibly deep question. We had one more question over there, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, please. Yes.
It's very brief. Can you comment in a couple of sentences about Ayurveda, Panchakarma, and what they call hard reboot of the system as well? Are you familiar? What is your thought about it?
You're asking me? What did you say? Karma? Did I misunderstand?
No, Panchakarma, Ayurveda, which is Indian medicine.
Oh, I think we need to bring my better half, Serena, to answer that question. I'm not familiar with that type of medicine, unfortunately, but maybe you guys?
I think the most important thing is that whatever we give to people, we should try and subject to clinical trials to find out if it works. I think there's probably a lot of interesting wisdom in traditional medicine. We often find that, some of the most interesting medical compounds are found in bacteria in the soil or in bark of trees. We've got drugs from loads of different places, but the important thing is to, test them and see if they work, because at the end of the day, it's very easy to fool yourself when taking something and getting better. So what I thought I'd finish with, sorry, we haven't got time for any more questions, but one thing that I know everybody always asks and everybody will want to know is what can they do today? So please keep this as short as possible, just a sentence or two if you can. What is the single thing that people can go home and do now to try and live long enough to benefit from some of these drugs? And start with David and move across the panel.
Well, we've both written books. In my book, you want to look at page 304 of the English version. That's the summary. If there was one thing that I could say, it would be to eat less often, eat in a window. That's been remarkable. I've switched to mostly vegan as well because of Serena, my partner. And that's both of those practices have had remarkable benefits to my biochemistry and my health, and probably my age as well.
Chris?
So I wanted to make a joke about smoking or something because of these centenarians, these 100-year-olds who do that. Obviously, don't do that. I am of two minds. I think, on the one hand, protect your DNA. So try to avoid, that's, of course, if this DNA damage hypothesis and DNA, the information theory is correct, which I think it is, try to avoid exposing yourself to things that will damage it, because that will accelerate. Having said that, I don't do anything too special, because I think a lot of that right now is not controlled by your behavior, but it's controlled by your genes and their ability to repair. So I don't go out of my way to damage it. Don't do that. But I think actually relaxing and not stressing too much. I'm Italian, so following sort of that Mediterranean lifestyle, they're not that stressed about it, and it's probably genetic. They probably have no, responsibility there, honestly. They can't take credit, but don't stress too much. Yeah. Sleep, exercise, love each other. Enjoy food, but not.
You try and do all the health advice and health podcasts, you'll spend like more than 24 hours a day doing health stuff. So, try and avoid that, I think, definitely. And Sam?
Yeah, so I think exercise has been shown to be one of the most effective ways. So exercise a lot. And then I also would go with David. So eat less. The older you are, the less often you should eat. So fasting. Yeah.
And my most important piece of health advice, which might sound slightly strange, is if you're mostly doing, all the right things, exercise, not smoking, not drinking too much, eating right, doing the things the panel have already mentioned, please go and tell people about this science. We absolutely need to campaign for more public funding for this research, because unless we have that money, unless we're getting more than $1 per person in the US, these breakthroughs are going to come much, much later. They're going to come, in time maybe for our children, our grandchildren, but not in time for people who are alive today. So I think go out, spread the word. It sounds like a bit of a strange thing, but I think if you're already doing the right things, then actually the development of this longevity medicine is what's going to keep us all as healthy as possible for as long as possible. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to David, Chris, and Sam. My book and David's book are both available in Dussmann, which is just down the road on Friedrichstrasse. So you can pop around and buy a copy if you fancy. And thank you very much for being here.